freed them from a slavish inquiry and dependence upon public opinion. Public opinion could be what management made it. And for any of you here who are students of business, of marketing, you know that marketing really means overcoming sales resistance. This can be done by saying, hey, you've got a flat tire and I'll sell you a good tire to replace it, but can also be done by saying that set of apparently good tires you have in your car is horrible and it's socially degrading, and you can buy these tires that have a white stripe around the wheel and upgrade your social status. Now, if you think that's an absurd story about tires, I want you to think about sneakers for children that cost $150, even though they're made of exactly the same materials in the same factories as the sneakers that are made for $10 for children. And the only difference is the Air Jordan logo on the side and maybe a slight difference in styling. So this is a major idea I'm presenting to you, and it was a major idea when it occurred to businessmen, big businessmen, not merchants, big businessmen, that they didn't have to wait for a demand, that they could take whatever supply was easily at hand or cheapest at hand and peddle it by psychological means. Thus, from the very beginning, the founders of compulsory schooling aimed at collectivizing and socializing the ordinary population through the inculcation of habits of dependency. In simpler terms, they worked to extend childhood beyond its natural limits by arranging the removal of young people from home and neighborhood surroundings and their placement with total strangers, false kin, as it were, unknown to parents. And to deepen the bewildering estrangement, these strangers were themselves under the comprehensive direction of faraway strangers, completely hidden from public view, from whose decisions there was no appeal. I hope that the Latinate phrasing doesn't conceal from you that I'm talking about the fact that your local principal takes his orders, he thinks, from the local superintendent, but the local superintendent full well knows that he's taking his orders from somewhere else. He's not quite sure where. It might be the Carnegie Foundation, it might be from the government or from its agency assigned to schooling. And if you go into the government and the agencies assigned to schooling, you find out that they're taking their orders from somewhere else, and they're not quite sure where, but they do know that key politicians will punish them if these orders aren't followed. And so we get into the rarefied realm of political control, but that we'll save for another talk. So as I told you at the start, I first got wind of the real purposes of American schooling from James Bryant Conant, president of Harvard University for 30 years, an inner circle manager of the atomic bomb project during World War II, high commissioner of the American zone in occupied Germany after the war. And shortly after the war, this Mr. Conant began to produce a stream of books about schools and society. I would have no doubt that in the university library, all of those books, and there are a great many, are available. Conant is often credited with being the principal legitimatizer of gargantuan high school plans, those anonymous warehouses of 2,000 to 5,000 students like Columbine in Littleton, Colorado. In a book published in 1949 bearing the title The Child, the Parent, and the State, I mean, there's a title to roll around inside your mouth. The Child, the Parent, and the State. Conant mentioned in passing that a coup had given us modern schooling. He didn't bother to elaborate on the details of that coup. He simply stated that a coup had given us modern schooling. So if you have a professor or a relative who said, "Did you listen to a conspiracy talk in Convocation Hall tonight?" you say, "Well, this fellow Gatto says that the president of Harvard said that in a book called The Child, the Parent, and the State." Excuse my ironic tone. Anyone interested in the details of this coup, Conan said, could read a book called Principles of Secondary Education, printed in 1918, to find out what the details were. That slight reference aroused my curiosity because I had been in a classroom about 26 years, and I was ready to find out what kind of a coup had given us this instrument that I was serving. But I was frustrated because no library I went to had the book listed, not even the Columbia University Library, and that was frustrating. So I settled for looking up the author of the book instead. Now, if you keep in mind that the president of Harvard had claimed in public print that this fellow, his name was Alexander Inglis, held the key to a coup which explains modern compulsion schooling, I hope you'll be as interested in Inglis's background as I was. It seems that Inglis was the descendant of a prominent American family highly sympathetic to the British side in America's Revolution. One of his ancestors was the rector of New York City's famous Trinity Church. That's an Anglican parish representing the elite of the official state religion of Britain. And that particular Inglis was working tirelessly at the time of the Revolution to bring about a state religion in the United States. For reasons best known to himself, he fled from George Washington's advancing army. Another Inglis wrote a refutation of common sense. Now, for the young out there, you may not recognize the allusion to a book which is widely credited as being one of the fuses that led directly to the American Revolution. Paine wrote a stirring call to revolt against England, and that Inglis who wrote the refutation was paid off by being named the first Anglican bishop of Nova Scotia. If you'll be patient with me to lay in this background, when I come to tell you what Inglis says the purposes of schooling are, you'll see that you're not in the hands of a conspiracy theorist, but somebody quite important. And still another of Inglis's relatives was the commanding general of the British forces at the siege of Lucknow in India during the Sepoy uprising in 1857. He was promoted to Major General for his gallantry in the face of the rebellious Sepoy wretches. And I'll tell you one last fact about Inglis. If you ever attend the honor lecture in education at Harvard University, ever since 1926, it has been called the Inglis Lecture. And now we'll get to the 6 purposes of schooling according to Dr. Inglis. School was intended on this continent to be, as it had been in northern Germany, a 5th column into the burgeoning libertarian condition where disenfranchised and oppressed groups were clamoring for some kind of seat at the bargaining table. School was to be a surgical incision into which the class-based management theories of England were to be inserted to interdict the liberty traditions. England's multi-layered social class is simply a modern-day representation of Julius Caesar's advice that when you're overwhelmed by the enemy, you divide them and conquer them that way by setting them against each other. The method was to be by infiltration into the minds of children, out of sight of their parents. The well-read here won't be shocked. Theorists from Plato to Rousseau to Frederick of Prussia knew and taught explicitly that if children could be kept childish beyond its term in nature, if they could be cloistered in a society of children without any real responsibility except obedience, if their inner lives could be attenuated by removing the insights of history, literature, philosophy, economics, religion, if the imminence of death and the certainty of pain and loss can be removed from daily consciousness, if the profound reflections on one's own death could be replaced with the trivializing emotions of greed, envy, jealousy, and fear, young people would grow older, but they would never grow up, and a great enduring problem of supervision would be solved. For who can argue against the truth that childish and childlike people are far easier to manage than critically trained, self-reliant ones? And now you're ready to hear the 6 purposes of modern schooling taken directly from Dr. Inglis's book. The first function of schooling is adjustive. Schools are to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority. That's fixed habits of reaction. Notice that this precludes critical judgment completely. Notice, too, that requiring obedience to stupid orders is a much better test of function 1 than following sensible orders ever could be. You don't know whether people are reflexively obedient unless they'll march right off the cliff. Second is the diagnostic function. School is to determine each student's proper social role, logging the evidence mathematically and anecdotally on cumulative records. You probably thought that the kid or parents or neighbors or the region, circumstances, no. School is to determine your proper social role, and they're to fix you in that role mathematically on their cumulative records. Next comes the sorting function. School sorts children by training individuals only so far as their likely destination in the social machine, not one step beyond. Keep in mind, you're not listening to John Gatto. You're listening to the man for whom the honor lecture in education at Harvard is named. The fourth function is conformity. As much as possible, kids are to be made alike. Whatever the background they come from, they're to be made alike. This is not done from any passion for egalitarian ideals, but so that their future behavior will be mathematically predictable in service to market research and government research. Next comes the hygienic function. This one's my favorite. This has nothing to do with individual health, but it has a lot to do with the health of the race, at least as Inglis or Darwin or his first cousin Galton saw it. Hygiene is a polite way of saying that school is expected to accelerate natural selection by tagging the unfit so clearly. That's what all those little humiliations from first grade on, that's what